Chapter 24, the USSPPO. Miss Thornhill had always kept a close eye on the Addams family. She found them strange, unsettling, and dangerous for young Tyler, especially with all the mysteries surrounding their dark history. So, when she overheard Wednesday's conversation with Tyler about spending the summer at their estate in New Jersey, it didn't sit right with her. She wasted no time in heading to Sheriff Donovan Galvin's office. She arrived unannounced, the door creaking open as she walked in, a look of concern plastered on her face. "Sheriff Galvin," she began, her voice light but dripping with a hint of urgency. "I'm afraid I've overheard something that might be of interest to you." Donovan, seated behind his desk, didn't look up at first. He was busy filling out paperwork, but he knew Miss Thornhill's tone all too well. She never just talked, she always had something to say. He sighed and rubbed his temples, setting his pen down before looking at her. "What is it now, Miss Thornhill?" he asked, his voice weary. "More advice on how to raise my son?" Her lips curled into a faint smile, almost as if she were pleased to see him so perturbed. "No, Sheriff. But I think you'll want to hear this. I overheard Wednesday Addams talking about inviting Tyler to spend the summer with them at their estate in New Jersey." Donovan's eyes darkened immediately. "What did you just say?" Miss Thornhill leaned forward, her voice lowering just enough to emphasize the gravity of her words. "She wants him to spend the summer there, with them. I thought you should know. I mean, after everything that's happened with him and his lies." Donovan's jaw tightened, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the desk. "What lies?" Miss Thornhill gave a small, almost pitying sigh. "Oh, come on, Donovan. You're not that naive. Tyler lied to you not too long ago. You remember, don't you? When he said he was going to Mexico for spring break with his friends?" Her eyes gleamed with subtle malice. "But we both know he was playing house with the Addams family, didn't he?" She let the silence hang for a beat, watching as Donovan's face shifted, his irritation turning into something darker, something close to betrayal. "I haven't forgotten about that, Miss Thornhill," Donovan snapped, his voice sharp. "But what does this have to do with him spending the summer with them?" Miss Thornhill straightened, folding her arms across her chest, her gaze fixed on Donovan. "I think it has everything to do with it. If he lied to you once, what makes you think he won't do it again? What makes you think he won't go off with them, like last time, and God knows what kind of influence they'll have on him? You don't know who they really are, Donovan. People like them, they have ways of making people change. Look at what they did to him already." Donovan's fists clenched in frustration, but Miss Thornhill wasn't done. "You've got to stop him from making another mistake," she continued, her voice softening as she took a step closer, like a predator circling its prey. "You can't let him fall under their spell again. He needs to be here, with you. You're his father. It's your responsibility to protect him from those people." Donovan stared at her, torn between anger and something else, guilt, perhaps. Miss Thornhill had a point. He didn't trust the Addams family, and if Tyler was still keeping secrets from him, then that meant something deeper was at play. Later that day, Tyler sat at the kitchen table, tapping his fingers anxiously against the wood. He had already packed his bag, he was ready. But he didn't expect the conversation with his father to go quite like this. "Dad," Tyler started, trying to sound calm, though there was a simmering frustration in his voice. "I told you. I need to go. This is important." Donovan glared at his son, arms crossed. "Important? You think running off to New Jersey with those people is important?" His voice was tight, controlled, too controlled, as if he was trying not to lose it completely. Tyler's frustration grew. "Dad, this isn't about them. It's about me needing to figure things out. I can't do that here. You don't understand, Wednesday and her family know things. Things I need to know." Donovan's lips curled into a thin, disapproving line. "What you need is to stop lying to me, Tyler. You think I've forgotten what happened when you said you were going to Mexico with your friends during spring break? You were with them, the Addams family. You didn't tell me the truth, and I'm still dealing with that. Tyler's anger flared, but he clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. I never meant to lie to you. I didn't want to explain everything because I knew you wouldn't understand, but I'm telling you the truth now. I'm not just going to play house with them. I need to go. Donovan's eyes were icy. You said you needed to go with your friends, Tyler. Not to their house. I thought I raised you better than that. Tyler stood up abruptly, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. I'm not a kid anymore, Dad. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like everything's fine. You lied to me, too. You never told me the truth about Mom. About what really happened. The words hit Donovan like a punch to the gut, and his face went pale. He opened his mouth to say something but stopped himself, the weight of his own lies pressing down on him. Tyler continued, his voice quieter now, but the frustration still there. I'm going to New Jersey, Dad. With or without your permission. You've kept me in the dark for so long, and now you're trying to control me even more. I'm not that little kid you can just keep in a cage. Donovan's expression faltered. The hurt in his eyes was evident, but he wasn't backing down. You think this is about control? No. This is about keeping you safe. I won't let you go off with those people again, Tyler. Not after what happened last time. Tyler's chest tightened, but he stood his ground. Then maybe you don't trust me at all. Donovan's face hardened, and his voice was low, almost dangerous. I trust you to make the right choice, Tyler. And this? This is not the right choice. There was a tense silence, and Tyler felt the weight of his father's words sink in. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, but Tyler refused to back down. He couldn't. Not now. Then I'll make the choice for myself, Tyler said, his voice steady despite the anger swirling inside him. Donovan exhaled sharply, a mix of disappointment and anger in his eyes. Fine. But don't come back to me when you realize what a mistake this is. Tyler nodded once, his face set in determination. I won't. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, the door shutting behind him with a soft click. Later at the sheriff's department, Donovan Galvin sat behind his desk, still stewing over the conversation with Tyler, when the door to his office creaked open again. He didn't look up immediately. He was tired of the constant drama surrounding his son, tired of Miss Thornhill's meddling, and certainly tired of the Adams family. But as the scent of expensive perfume drifted into the room, he knew exactly who was standing in the doorway. Adele Adams. What do you want, Miss Adams? Donovan asked, his voice strained as he didn't even bother to look up from the papers on his desk. His hands were clenched into fists on the table, his patience fraying with every passing minute. Adele stepped into the room, her heels clicking sharply against the wood floor as she took her time, almost as if she were enjoying the tension in the air. She was tall, elegant, and carried herself with an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. She didn't smile, at least, not in any way that could be called friendly. But there was something in her eyes that suggested she wasn't just a casual visitor. Oh, nothing, Adele replied, her tone sweet, yet laced with sarcasm. I just had a little chat with Tyler. Interesting story, he was on his way to you to get permission to spend the summer with us, but turns out you already know. She paused, her lips curling into a slight, knowing smile. Let me guess. Miss Thornhill? Donovan's jaw tightened at the mention of Miss Thornhill's name, and his eyes flicked up to Adele. What's it to you? Adele's smile only widened, but there was no humor in it. She could tell she'd hit a nerve. You know, for someone who likes to play the tough guy, you sure don't seem to be so smart, she said, her tone mocking, but with an edge. Let me spell it out for you, Sheriff. This is only the third time that Miss Thornhill has meddled in Wednesday's and Tyler's affair. The first time, I thought she was just showing off, trying to get in good with Principal Weems and the staff at Nevermore. Second time, it was just being nosy. But the third time? Come on, Sheriff. She leaned forward, locking eyes with him, her gaze cold. Out of all the students at Nevermore, why is she so honed in on my cousin and her boyfriend? Have you ever asked yourself that? Donovan's brow furrowed. He hadn't thought much of Miss Thornhill's previous interference. In fact, it had almost felt like nothing. But the way Adele spoke, the way she framed it, there was something there, something deeper. She was right. He hadn't questioned it enough. He didn't know much about Thornhill's background, her past, or her motivations, but he didn't like where this conversation was headed. Adele wasn't done, though. She continued, her voice lowering, more measured now. Now, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you this, Sheriff, but nobody does anything if they don't stand to gain something from it. And from what I see, Miss Thornhill is doing one hell of a job manipulating you. She tilted her head, her eyes studying Donovan as though she were reading him like an open book. You can't deny it, she's playing you. Donovan's fists clenched involuntarily at the thought. He had felt manipulated. He'd known something didn't sit right with Miss Thornhill, but now, with Adele's words ringing in his ears, it seemed more like a fact than a suspicion. She wasn't just some concerned teacher, she was something much more dangerous. But his mind was still reeling from the surprise. And what about you? Donovan shot back, trying to flip the conversation around, his voice sharp with defensiveness. Why do you want my son to spend so much time with you and your family? Adele straightened her back, her lips curling into a perfectly controlled smirk. Oh, that's simple. Wednesday is more cooperative when Tyler's around. Her tone was deadpan, no hint of humor in her voice. His presence helps her feel more comfortable, more open to conversation. We have a lot to discuss, Sheriff. Things you don't need to know, but things she needs to. The bluntness of her response caught Donovan off guard. He had heard of Adele's background, but her calculated nature, her cold, almost clinical detachment, was unsettling. She was no fool, and neither was he. This wasn't just about summer vacations or spending time with the Addams family. This was a bigger game, one that he was already losing. But Donovan's resolve hardened. He wasn't about to let his son be swept up in whatever game the Addams family was playing. My son is not spending any more time with you people, he said firmly, his voice a low growl. Adele's smile didn't waver. Fine, but don't be surprised if Miss Thornhill sticks around for the summer. Just a thought. Her eyes sparkled with something close to amusement, as though she knew exactly what would happen next. She turned, making her way to the door, but just before she left, she glanced back at him. Think about it, Sheriff. It might be time to stop playing the hero and start looking at the bigger picture. With that, she was gone, the door closing behind her with a soft click. Donovan stared at the empty space where she had stood, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the room. He knew he was caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, he didn't trust the Addams family. On the other, he didn't trust Miss Thornhill. And now, with Adele's cryptic warning about the summer, he could feel the walls closing in around him. The question was, what was he really protecting Tyler from? Was it the Addams family? Or something even darker that was starting to emerge from the shadows? As Wednesday and Pugsley packed their things, preparing to leave Nevermore for the Addams family estate in New Jersey, the air between Wednesday and Tyler felt unusually heavy. The looming summer, filled with uncertain tensions, seemed to hang over them both, even though they hadn't spoken much about it. I don't feel comfortable leaving you, Wednesday said, her voice unexpectedly serious as she looked at Tyler with an intensity that made her words feel like a weight in the air. Her usual stoic demeanor was softened, just a little, as she studied him closely. Tyler smiled gently, trying to ease her unease. Summer will pass by quickly, don't worry, he reassured her, his tone light but sincere. He was more used to her dark humor than her moments of vulnerability, and despite the circumstances, he appreciated how much she cared. Wednesday narrowed her eyes, considering his words for a moment. Adele said she's going to spend her summer in Washington to get information on Miss Thornhill, she said, her expression unreadable, but there was a certain steely calm in her voice. I trust Adele's instincts. She's thorough when it comes to keeping things under control. That's good, Tyler said, though a part of him couldn't shake the discomfort he felt about Adele's involvement. He trusted her, but didn't quite know her the way Wednesday did. There was always something off about the way she operated, an unnerving ability to read people, sometimes too well. Wednesday looked up at him then, locking her gaze with his, her eyes filled with that deadpan intensity she was known for. If you see Miss Thornhill, turn and go the other way. Tyler nodded without hesitation. I will. He understood. He knew exactly how Wednesday felt about people like Thornhill, those who lurked in the shadows, pretending to be helpful, but always with an agenda. He was aware of the games being played, and he didn't want to put himself or Wednesday at risk. He leaned in, his intentions clear, but Wednesday stepped back just enough to put a polite distance between them, her cold expression never faltering. No open displays of public affection, she said firmly, her words holding a quiet authority. Tyler smiled, a little amused by her consistency in keeping boundaries. He didn't mind. He had long since learned to respect Wednesday's wishes, even if it sometimes meant reining in his own impulses. Instead, he gave her a soft peck on the cheek, his lips lingering just for a second longer than necessary before pulling away. Wednesday's eyes softened imperceptibly, but she said nothing more, instead turning her attention to Pugsley, who was more preoccupied with the prospect of adventure than the emotional complexities of their family. Meanwhile, Sheriff Donovan Galvin was still grappling with the weight of his recent interactions. He had warned Tyler, but deep down, a part of him wondered if his son was truly making the right decision. And then there was Miss Thornhill, a constant thorn in his side. He had been put on alert when Miss Thornhill had seemingly made plans to stay in Jericho for the summer. But, like all things concerning her, he didn't fully trust it. She had told him a story that she found another summer job elsewhere, and for a moment, Donovan let his guard down, assuming she had indeed left. Adele's black 1959 Cadillac glided smoothly through the streets of Washington, its sleek design a sharp contrast to the hurried, mundane pace of the city. As she stepped out of the car, the world seemed to pause for a beat, recognizing her arrival. Dressed to perfection in her white silk bow blouse, Chanel blazer, pencil skirt, black stocking, and those striking black Miss Jane's single-strap pumps, Adele exuded the kind of authority and elegance that had people stepping aside without a word. Her sunglasses, dark and mysterious, hid the icy focus behind her sharp features as she walked with the poise of someone who always got what they wanted. Miss Adams, you're still not authorized to be here in Washington, a low-level employee mumbled, stepping into her path as she moved toward the entrance. Adele glanced at him briefly, her lips curling slightly in disdain. I'm here for personal matters, dog, she replied coolly, her voice dripping with distaste as she brushed past him with ease. Without a second glance, she stepped into the elevator, her heels clicking on the polished floor. The employee scrambled to catch up, the elevator doors beginning to close as he arrived breathlessly, just in time to slip inside. Adele didn't spare him a glance, simply turning her back to him as the doors closed with a soft ding. Such a dog, she muttered under her breath, clearly not bothered by the man's desperation to be seen as important. The elevator ascended smoothly as Adele adjusted her posture, straightening her blazer. She was here for business, and she wasn't about to let anyone get in her way. When the elevator doors opened, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. It was like stepping into a different world entirely, an intensely organized command center filled with the constant hum of activity. Dozens of monitors and computers displayed various intel on the large screens that lined the walls, but it was Adele who commanded immediate attention the moment she stepped out of the lift. Marilyn Thornhill. Adele's voice cracked through the room with venom and precision. Every head in the room turned toward her. In one motion, she whipped off her sunglasses, revealing a gaze sharp enough to cut glass, the cold intensity of a predator who knew exactly what she wanted. Pull up everything you can about that woman. I also want all the information on the Gates family, she ordered, her voice cold and unyielding. The sound of rapid keyboard clicking filled the air as the tech scrambled to meet her demand. As they worked, Adele's eyes never wavered from the screen, watching everything unfold before her, absorbing the information. She was a woman who operated on instinct, and her instincts had never been wrong. Someone spoke up from the corner of the room. The Gates family, all deceased. Their eldest son, Garrett Gates, was presumed to have been killed by Gomez Adams 30 years ago. However, the charges were dropped when they found nightshade poison in his system. The poison seemed to have been carried by the victim, as a shattered vial was found in his pocket, likely broken during a fight with Gomez. His father, Ansel Gates, confessed to ordering his son to spike the drink at the Raven Dance at Nevermore Academy. Mr. and Mrs. Gates died shortly after, leaving only their youngest daughter, Laura Gates, who drowned overseas. Adele's eyes flashed, her expression serious and calculating. "Can you confirm that?" "I'll get right on it, ma'am," came the quick reply, and another flurry of typing followed. "Ma'am, it looks like the old Gates mansion was purchased by a woman named Teresa L. Glau," another technician added, his voice filled with the faintest hint of confusion. Adele raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. "Who would want to buy that place? It's dilapidated beyond repair." "She's 90, the technician offered, not quite sure how to respond. "Is she still alive? Does she have Alzheimer's? Check her tax records. See if she really exists," Adele ordered in a sharp tone. "Ma'am, do you also want to know about the Gates' ancestry?" another technician ventured, cautiously. Adele's gaze narrowed, her sharp eyes never leaving the screens. "I said everything, didn't I? What did you find?" A few seconds later, a technician spoke again. "Their records go back to the 1700s, to the founding of Jericho. They're descendants of Joseph Crackstone, who is listed in Normie books as the founder of Jericho." Adele's lips curled into a grim smile. "Give me the real history." "He was a zealot," came the grim reply. "A genocidal maniac. He burned all the outcasts in 16th century Jericho in the meeting house." "Exactly," Adele snapped, her voice rising. "And that's why we exist, people. To protect our kind from people like that, people who would burn us alive just for being different." She slammed her fist down on the nearest desk, causing the surrounding staff to jump. "Now where's that information on Miss Thornhill?" "Still working, ma'am," a technician muttered, visibly intimidated by her forceful presence. Before Adele could respond, a familiar voice rang out from the back of the room, one that made her stiffen momentarily. "Adele Adams, what are you doing here?" Adele turned, her expression unreadable as she looked at the man who had just appeared, Jerry, an old acquaintance. The man who had once been an ally, but now was just another part of the bureaucracy she loathed. "Getting information. What else would I be doing here?" she answered, her voice blunt and direct. "Good to see you, Jerry. I just need to get the information on that nosy Miss Thornhill, and I'll be on my way." Jerry's face was grim, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "No, stay. We have a client." Adele's eyes flashed, the weight of his words settling in. She knew exactly what he meant. It wasn't a request, it was an order. And unfortunately for her, that meant she was stuck in Washington for the summer. "You're not leaving anytime soon, Adams," Jerry said, his tone firm. Adele's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She could feel the walls closing in around her, the insidious pull of the USSPPO and its complex web of politics. "Of course not," she said coolly, her voice laced with a calm anger. "After all, what's summer without a little work?" Her mind raced with everything that was still left to uncover. Miss Thornhill's presence in Jericho, the mystery of the Gates family, and whatever dark secret the USSPPO was hiding, it was all coming to a head, and Adele had no choice but to stay in Washington, grinding away at her mission. She took a deep breath and steeled herself. The summer was just beginning, and she was going to make it count. The United States Secret Program for Protecting Outcasts, known as USSPPO, or ASSPPO for America's Secret Program for Protecting Outcasts, was born out of the very same need for secrecy and protection that gave rise to the Nightshade Secret Society at Nevermore Academy. While the Nightshade Society was initially a clandestine group dedicated to helping outcasts navigate the treacherous waters of society, especially in the early days of Nevermore, it didn't take long for its ideals to evolve into something bigger, something more widespread. The birth of USSPPO. In the late 1800s, as the legacy of Nevermore Academy continued to expand, many of its former students began to make their way into society, each with their own personal goals, careers, and missions. However, as these students grew in influence, they discovered that their kind, be it werewolves, vampires, witches, or other outcasts, were still at risk. Public persecution, bigotry, and even violence toward outcasts remained rampant, especially in larger cities. The ideals of the Nightshade Secret Society began to take root outside of Nevermore, as these former students felt the growing need to establish an official program to protect their people on a national scale. The turning point came when a group of these outcasts, many of them former Nightshades, found themselves facing escalating prejudice in Washington, D.C. The capital city, often a symbol of national power, had little tolerance for their kind, and as various political movements gained traction, so did the rhetoric against outcasts. These individuals, once students who had learned to hide their true nature within the walls of Nevermore, realized that they needed more than just secrecy. They needed an organized system that could provide legal protections, foster alliances, and ensure that outcasts across the nation had a voice. It was then that the USSPPO was formed, originating from a direct response to a series of discriminatory policies passed in the early 20th century. The U.S. government, influenced by extremist factions and rising anti-outcast sentiments, had passed legislation that restricted the rights of supernatural beings. The USSPPO began as a shadow organization, working in the unseen, to counteract those oppressive laws. The Nightshade Connection. The Nightshade Secret Society was a natural precursor to the USSPPO, and many of its key members transitioned from the secretive student society to positions of influence within the newly founded organization. These former Nightshaders, witches, werewolves, and those of other supernatural backgrounds, used their skills, resources, and connections to protect those of their kind across the nation. They knew firsthand the dangers of living in a world that often misunderstood or even feared them. The Nightshade alumni formed the nucleus of the USSPPO, planting the seeds for an organization that would grow beyond Washington, D.C., to extend its reach into cities and communities nationwide. They acted as protectors and informers, using their influence to ensure the well-being of outcasts everywhere. Their ultimate goal was to dismantle the social systems of prejudice and bigotry that sought to oppress their kind. The function of the USSPPO. The USSPPO is a highly secretive organization that operates under the radar of most normal citizens. Its operations span across multiple levels of government, law enforcement, and underground networks that allow them to be one step ahead of those who would harm outcasts. Their members are recruited from a variety of backgrounds, many of them former Nightshaders themselves, but some from outside the supernatural community who have a deep belief in equality and justice for all. The USSPPO works in close cooperation with the Nightshade Secret Society, which continues to operate as a more informal yet highly influential group within the supernatural world. While Nightshade remains deeply rooted in the history and traditions of Nevermore Academy, the USSPPO is a far-reaching arm of protection, advocating for the rights and safety of outcasts in all walks of life. Key functions and operations. Legal defense and advocacy. One of the primary functions of the USSPPO is to fight for legal protections for outcasts. This includes lobbying for laws that prevent discrimination, providing legal defense for outcasts who face charges due to their nature, and ensuring that supernatural beings are not unjustly prosecuted for their abilities or differences. Secret Intelligence Network. The USSPPO maintains an extensive intelligence network to track political and social movements that may pose a threat to outcasts. They monitor hate groups, anti-outcast legislation, and shifts in public sentiment. This network is essential for ensuring that outcasts are not caught off guard by new dangers, allowing the USSPPO to act before situations escalate. Emergency protection and evacuation. When outcasts are in imminent danger, whether from government raids, hate crimes, or other threats, the USSPPO provides an emergency response. This could range from safe house programs to evacuation protocols, whisking individuals away from harm to safe, undisclosed locations. These operations are carried out with the utmost secrecy and precision, ensuring that no trace is left behind. Training and education. In addition to its protective role, the USSPPO is also dedicated to training new generations of outcasts in self-defense, political activism, and how to survive in a world that may be hostile to their existence. They have secret academies and training programs that teach outcasts how to blend into society while maintaining their identities and keeping their supernatural abilities under control. Public relations and influence. The USSPPO works behind the scenes to shape public perception and promote positive imagery of outcasts. They use media manipulation, political connections, and direct outreach to promote their agenda of equality and non-discrimination. The goal is not just to protect outcasts, but to eventually change the cultural and societal norms that see them as other. International reach. While the USSPPO is primarily a domestic organization, it has international ties, particularly with other secret societies and outcast organizations in Europe and beyond. These international alliances help ensure that outcasts are not only protected within the United States, but are given support globally when necessary. Like, comment, and subscribe to be notified for updates on this series.